More doesn't equal better. I will do more of what's not working. Just dial it up. And that's what everyone winds up doing. It got really intense. I remember practicing sometimes 8 hours, 5 times a week, and without really making any significant progress.
Welcome to the Spanish Guitar Mastermind, where we take a look at the journey of accomplished artists so that we can learn from their mindset, strategies, and daily habits. Now, if you know me, you know that I love to look outside of our own industry. So as musicians, starting to look outside of our own niche, our own genre, and ultimately outside of the music industry, there is a ton to learn from that I think if you only stay within the music industry, you will definitely limit yourself from growth. So one of the industries and some of the artists that I admire the most and respect the most because of the discipline needed to achieve their level of mastery for performance is the artists that you find in contemporary circuses. Now, one of those artists, I stumbled upon him a couple of years ago online since he wrote a book called The Art of Practice. His name is Laido, and I'm about to introduce you guys to him. And he talks about how he reached his level of mastery, the difference between naturals, and how you don't have to be a natural to necessarily reach a certain level of mastery in your skill set. And ultimately, the same type of skill sets that are needed to be a circus artist, we can apply that to the music world as well. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'm just going to invite him right on. Welcome to the show, Laido.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I actually agree with everything you just said.
Perfect. So Laido, I'll let you explain a little bit about your history, but just to kind of give a little intro into it, one of the things that I connected with you the most is that, well, you come from a family of circus artists, but that said, you say that you weren't necessarily a natural or you weren't necessarily gifted at the youngest age where you find a lot of these circus artists are at from the age of 5 or 6. And then eventually you had to find your own way by looking outside of the circus industry and learning from whole different fields and doing your own research to put together what was able to help you launch your career definitely in your own way. And I could relate to that because I wasn't the natural. I don't even come from a family of musicians.
Yeah.
And I had to find my own strategies to kind of catapult myself into the level I've been able to achieve. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how you started in the circus arts and how you weren't necessarily a natural as you got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm coming from a Russian-Hungarian circus family. Growing up, I would say I lived the typical life of a circus child, which basically meant that my parents were trying out all kinds of different skills with me to really figure out what it was that I was supposed to be the most talented at. Since both of them were acrobats, naturally, the first thing they tried with me was acrobatics, which I was actually really bad at. So, of course, in this case, you try to switch it up. And I tried other stuff like, unicycling, hand balancing. But any type of genre that I really tried, it wasn't really working out quite as well. As much as they tried or I tried, it didn't really seem to progress the way my parents were hoping I would. There weren't any real signs of talent, which you, in this case, usually look for. And so quite early on, everyone, and even I, believed I wouldn't become a circus artist at all. So when I became interested in becoming an artist, contrary to what people think, I was already 17 or almost 18, which is regarded as quite late. The reason why they regard it as quite late is because most jugglers who get to do it professionally started juggling usually at the age of 6 or so. So to start at 18, all my friends and relatives from the circus kind of believed I was trying the impossible. And almost everyone even tried to convince me that if I wanted to become a circus artist, why didn't I choose something easier? As they would say, something that suits me more. That was their kind version of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just to relate to that, I think for a lot of concert level artists in mastery, more so like in classical guitar, if you're a solo guitarist, same thing. People expect you to start around 5, age of 5 or 6
Yeah.
and already show some certain level of talents. Similar.
Yeah, but some of us don't have that background built up or not having the right teachers. So you would need a lot of luck for it to work out really well from the age of 6. And most of us who try to get into it later on, we kind of feel like maybe already too late. Like there's a bunch of people who feel like that, and I really believe all is not lost. When they told me this, it was with good intentions, and it wasn't like a indirect, discreet advice either, because hearing things from others like you've got no talent, you started too late, you should do something easier, those kinds of things were the daily regular I would take in. It was just one of those things where even if I didn't create excuses for myself, I do believe people delivered me already quite a big bunch of them, and quite regularly too. I also couldn't really blame them. It was kind of a common belief in the circus world that if you didn't develop anything until the age of, let's say, 16, it was pretty much over, since the competition you would meet, the international competition, was so strong, and is still strong, that you really wouldn't have much of a chance to achieve anything significant or build a career out of it. So
Right.
in their eyes, I basically set myself up for definitive failure. And of course, people who love you try to, protect you, even
Yeah, it was a pretty
even if
solid
it's,
belief.
yes, it is. It is. I would also say they were kind of right, because it really didn't work out as well for me as I thought it would, at least not in the beginning. And it also wasn't because I wasn't putting enough time or work in. Because when it got really intense, I remember practicing sometimes 8 hours, 5 times a week, and without really making any significant progress. You have to imagine that this went on for at least a year and a half, at least, yeah, kind of, where I really progressed so slowly that you wouldn't even think there was a sense in seeing it as something you could do professionally in the future, at least
Right.
in the circus world. Now, I did improve a bit, and I did have some performances where I could kind of test myself, but those went awful as well. So a very, very epic fail that is really like a milestone for me was the first performance, because I remember dropping and making mistakes about 17 times, which were literally,
Wow.
yeah, it's a lot of mistakes.
I mean, I know
And
for the caliber of what they're expecting as a circus artist and that level of mastery, that's a lot of a lot
yeah,
of errors, right?
even for a
Yeah.
juggler, I would say it's pretty much the amount of mistakes were more than the actual tricks I had. So yeah, that wasn't going that well. Long story short, was a disaster. As you have these kind of experiences, of course, you start thinking about giving up. But in a weird way, the people in my environment were the ones that internally for me didn't really let me. And it wasn't because of the support, actually quite the opposite. I really feel thankful because they were really the ones who reminded me of my goal every day. They would probably never think about it that way, but they were the ones almost helping me the most. So almost every single day, I had to kind of give myself a promise that I don't let it stay as it was. So even after the awful performance, I decided to go to even more extreme measures, and it was already extreme.
Was that performance that you had, the horrible performance, was that like a breaking point where you said I have
It
to
was
start
definitely.
looking?
Yes, it was definitely because it gave me a clear mirror. Whatever I was trying, it was clearly not working. Even the tricks, when I believed that they were solid enough in a performance setting, it's a completely different world. Now I understand that my level has to be so much higher than actually what I perform. But when you are really at the beginning and it's the first time you perform, there is not much depth to that level. So you
Right.
collect that experience and understand that you have to be much, much better in order to even even if it was a low level in performance, to have that solid, you need to go much, much higher.
You need to be at this level so that when you get on stage with everything that comes with the stage, the
Yes.
anxiety or
Yes,
the
that it's
crowd,
still under
you're
your
never going to
control.
perform. You're going to be a little bit under that level, but you're still going to be
Yes.
at a good level.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Definitely.
Okay.
My practice regime is a lot harder than what I do in performance. But if you want to do a really great performance, then the practice has to match that skill
Right.
by a little bit more. And then you
Right.
can kind of feel safe even if you are fighting with your nerves, which is a completely different segment of a topic.
Up to this point, what was it, more the skill, or was it also your mind wandering off or overthinking at that point?
It
At
was
that
both.
point,
It
it was
was
a little bit of
both.
both still.
A little bit of both, but I would definitely say that my skill was lacking. The main problem still was the skill, because I I didn't had to fight with my nerves up to the point when I actually became already successful. And that's one of the things that I say. It's much easier to handle your nerves when nobody expects nothing from you. But once you have a reputation and people are expecting something of you and you have to keep up that reputation, then it's a completely different kind of pressure. That's the one that's more hardcore.
Is this the point where you started to delve into other strategies and starting look outside of
No, by
your,
far,
or
by
not
far
yet?
not.
Oh,
By
not
far,
yet?
by far not. I went with the same strategy and and turn it up a notch. Like
Okay.
most people have only, the single one strategy, and that's the basic strategy everyone has. I will do more of what's not working. Just dial it
Oh,
up.
right.
Because of course you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what else is there. And that's what everyone winds up doing, is going to the extremes. And for some it goes well because it's not the only not the only reason why it goes well, but they don't really realize it. And we will get into that, I'm sure. To give you a clear answer, yeah, from 8 hours I went up to 9 or 10 hours a day. And at times I even up to 12 hours, which wasn't something I would recommend anyone to do, because
Right.
as time went on, at one point I was diagnosed with burnout syndrome, because it was like literally the only thing you did in life. So I woke up, I went to practice, I practiced, having small breaks in between for food or something, but I had everything already, a sandwich with me. There was a coffee machine and automat, and it wasn't necessarily the most healthy kind of living, but I was there. I was doing the job until the practice place was closing down. I came back and then restart like a Groundhog's Day. During my travels, because it took me 1.5 hours, about 1.5 hours to get to the practice place, and I was still young. I didn't go with a car, but what I also decided to do was an idea. I had the time, because the only thing I ever did besides practicing was reading, and a lot of reading. I had heard, and this was way you have to keep in mind, but this was a long time ago, and back then I heard a lot about sports psychology, so I decided to read everything I could basically lay my hands on, which wasn't a lot at that time. But I read while eating, traveling. I also listened to courses. That's mainly where my English knowledge comes from, because
Okay.
I was just listening and
What type of courses are, like, a couple names or
uh,
people that you listen to?
Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, Napoleon Hill, a little bit of Tony Robbins, but not really.
Okay.
But
Some of the best of
the best of
self-development
self-help,
people. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
of self-help that I could find. But at that time, Brian Tracy was the easiest. So Phoenix
Okay.
Seminarium. If some people know, it's a really old school course, but very very good for
Okay.
especially for that time. It gave me courage in a lot of desperate times. Let's say it like
Yeah.
this. So I was really trying to learn everything I could about it, and one of the first things I learned was not even from a sports psychology book, but from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, because
Mm-hmm.
somebody from another course was recommending it. The basic idea was interviewing, because Napoleon Hill was interviewing the richest people in the world, taking their advice. So I thought, what if I just interviewed the best artists who already
Right.
achieved the things I wanted?
Yeah.
I made it my most important task to find them and interview them. And luckily, because of my background coming from circus, I could get access to them really easily, especially because there was every 2 years the Budapest International Circus Festival. So it's like the best of the best coming together into one place. And that helped a lot. Once I met them, I started asking them like questions, basically along the lines, what are the specific things that I should do or avoid and be aware in practice? Is there anything they do differently that makes them more successful? What are the mistakes they see? So all of this
Mm-hmm.
along the lines. And in my case, questioning them seemed to not work at all, because every time when the time came for them to answer, it really came off as some kind of bad graduation speech, where it's like, well, you have to love what you do and work hard. So that wasn't even like self-help level. That was like really,
Right. Sometimes some of the greatest maestros
yeah,
in whatever field they can't see from the outside perspective what really got them there, or they might just tell you what's working at that moment, which isn't what got them there originally.
yes, or they just go along
Yeah.
the lines of myths of the common knowledge, as if a common knowledge ever worked. Because if it
Mm-hmm.
would be really working, it wouldn't, then
It would
everybody would
work
be
for
successful.
right. It would
So,
work for everybody. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So, all the advice I got was really very non specific, very intangible. I would say it was not like, I was a little kid and they just trying to brush me off. Like I could see that they were really trying, but that didn't make any difference. So the
Right.
answers were the same, and I just asked myself, well, how should I love more what I do? How should I work harder on it? Because I already believed I kind of done those two things without getting any significant results. But
Right.
hearing the same kinds of answers over and over again, maybe after like 20th time repeatedly, which were also similar and unclear and vague, I understood that they couldn't really tell me, even if they really wanted to, simply because they seemed to not be really clear about it themselves. Whatever they were doing, they just did it. So the idea of interviewing completely failed. Another one. But I at that point I was kind of used to it. The funny thing though, when I had the experience of this, just as it happened, when I say just as it happened, it was like a week later or something. But I seen an advertisement about a class based on a book that is called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And it really sparked my interest because actually the only thing I seemed to have real talent at, especially outside of the circus field, was drawing. I spent a lot of time drawing. Well, not anymore, but before I started practicing.
Okay.
So at that point, I really started to think about maybe I was wasting all my time trying to become good at something I wasn't supposed to be talented at, while the thing I was actually talented at was going to waste. that's when I saw the advertisement, and it really clicked for me that maybe I just have a break. Maybe I just take a detour and go back to my old passion, so to say.
And this was a couple of years later?
It's really hard to say exact numbers, but I think it was already along the lines of 3 years. So it's
3 years down,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Of
yeah,
okay.
a lot. And at the same time, it was still very the progress was very sketchy. Like I tried to create an act. I tried to have different shows after the first one, but it was like dragging something dead along.
Right. A lot of
Yeah.
effort. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was thinking let's have a change of scenery so I can at least have a bit of a achievement and just give it a try. And so when I attended, what surprised me was that the principles they were teaching in drawing were most of the time things I was already doing. And I remember thinking, how can that be if I had never been actually taught how to draw before? The second thing was I also assumed everybody would naturally go about drawing the way I did, but they didn't. So the basic principles that for me personally never came to my mind were new to everyone else, but I was applying them without ever being taught. Once we did our first drawing, which is made in the class like more as a comparison, so you can see how much evolved you get during class. You make one before and you learn the techniques and you make another one after, and then they have a comparison how well the course worked. And when we did the first one, the instructor came up to me, and because my drawing was already not that bad, was quite decent. Yeah, she asked me, have I ever attended the class before? And of course, I told her that it was basically my first time, but I spent a lot of time. I used to spend a lot of time drawing, and that was a very defining moment for me because she said something that really shifted not instantly my perspective, but it got stuck in my head because she said, in that case, you might be a naturally talented person. And as I was thinking about that, I remember something really clicked, but I didn't instantly know how. It gave me ultimately, at one point, an answer why maybe all the greats I talked to couldn't tell me exactly what they did differently, because I did a lot of interviews. I interviewed basically the best of the best, and even I would say the best juggler in the world, Anthony Gatto, who was at that time the best juggler in the world. I asked him the same questions, and because I was thinking, from who should I learn if not from the best? And my expectations were really high about the answers that he would give me. But if there is a natural, it was him. He's like the ultimate natural. He's a juggler who supposedly allegedly at the age of 4 could already juggle. Never really had to like practice. Never really practiced 5 balls. He could just do 5 balls. So that was for me like the ultimate natural, and as expected, I believed I will get the ultimate answer for him because nobody asks, so I will ask. and, and same, pretty much the
Same thing.
same
Yeah.
thing. Pretty much the same thing.
Just
And
general answer.
so basically, it's possible that you do the right principles and you practice the right way without ever being conscious of them. And I believe that the same way I didn't know anything about what I didn't recognize I was doing right in drawing, they didn't know exactly what they were doing either. But it must have been, I hoped, at that point I just hoped that it must be practice principles that each of them followed.
Are you basically saying, or up to this point, do you think the main difference between a natural and somebody who isn't a natural is the way that they they approach the learning right on their own without having to get any guidance, or it's a combination of that and something else in there?
If we go really deeper, a lot deeper, it's not really about the strategies. Because if we follow the strategies, like we imitate how they are doing it, it does get results. It gets a lot of results. But what really makes the difference, and essentially what I found out makes the most difference, is almost like a level of self-esteem and natural
Right.
confidence. Self-esteem, confidence, because the choices we make can be divided into either we are doing it out of fear or out of, I wouldn't even say gain, out of confidence. Either fear of losing something or the desire of gaining something, but with
Right.
confidence.
Which you
And
can, yeah, which I've heard that applied to
yes,
more general life goals, but yeah, that makes sense too
yes,
when learning.
and
Yeah.
based on those factors, you start to make entirely different choices, not only in practice, but basically in all of your life, in very different situations. Because a lot of people are operating out of fear of not losing what they already have. So
Right.
they
Yeah.
don't really aim higher. They just try to protect the little that they got. Comes back to them in many different situations, and it also comes back in practice. I would say the main difference is basically nurturing self-esteem. So if a kid either grows up in an environment where this self-esteem is nurtured, which if they do, it's a very lucky kid, because most of them, most of us don't grow up in that kind of environment. But if it gets nurtured well, then they start to have a lot of self-confidence. They start to operate differently, and at the end of the day, they wind up doing different choices, and also mistakes. They just brush it off. They don't make
Right.
identity meaning out of it.
They don't
It-
dwell on them. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's the ultimate difference. The easier pathway, I would say, is imitating naturals, see results, and the results will build confidence, and it's possible to find the road again through that way. But it doesn't mean that everything that is about the right strategies wouldn't work. They do work, but they work a lot better if you are actually in the mind, having the mindset, having the self-esteem that's needed for that. When I started out drawing, I was actually very. Uh, I started out very poorly when I began to draw, but the thing is, I believe I had the natural attributes, so to say, to get better, without the need to learn or be shown how to approach it. And it's interesting because you can have confidence in one field and have a total lack in something else. And when I started drawing, I was really, really young. So the concept of mistakes or something, I didn't really care at that time. But when I started something at the older stage, interestingly, that didn't apply anymore. I just did the right things without consciously knowing about it. And I was convinced that the same way I found there were right principles I followed in drawing, there must be other principles. So once that clicked for me, I went back to the pros, but this time I really stopped asking them and I started to observe them and trying to search for the details and commonalities between them. And every time I got the chance to practice with a professional, which was quite often, because in Hungary, all the artists usually go to the same place, even the ones who are professional and working currently in the circus. So that's like a very good place for that. And every time I seen them, I just took a step back and I tried to find those things that were different from how I would go about doing them. Modeling the little things they were doing that the majority maybe never did or did in an opposite way, because it didn't seem important or went even completely unnoticed. Basically trying to find the difference that makes the difference. So I also started to take notes on what they started and finished with in practice, which kind of tricks or skills they chose to start out, and anything I could really think of. But mostly I was watching for things that were different. At the beginning, I only did this with jugglers, but as I started taking notes, I started to take notes not about naturals, but also non-naturals and in different genres. At first, again, only in the field of circus, because that was my environment. Over time, I began noticing how these mistakes were present almost anywhere I looked. So I was also starting to look out for other people. And I started to naturally observe the best artists in every field, not just juggling. And through these observations, I started to see how the seemingly subtle differences each person made in practice, no matter their field, had really an enormous impact on their progress. And these were things that are just as true for musicians as well as it is for athletes, dancers, basketball players, acrobats, because here it's really about the fine and gross motor skills. Basically anything that requires that and would essentially require practice, since the mistakes are the same and the solutions to those mistakes are the same as well. The one thing that became clear to me throughout the years is that naturals really think alike. As I said, they have very common behaviors no matter what field they work in. But it takes usually some knowledge from both sides to really uncover the map. Because no natural was ever a non-natural, and mainly that's the reason why they can't explain it or even know about it. They can't really associate themselves with us. You can they can explain bad technical movements, but they can't explain the right strategies or mental attitudes because the right thinking and actions came to them naturally, either born with it or they grew up in an environment that instilled the right thinking into them. So it's just second nature, I guess.
Right.
And if you come with questions, they will know how to handle usually the external part, because that seems obvious to them, that they don't even think about it. But it's like water to a fish.
Right.
Yeah, and because
Right.
and because of that, they naturally assume that it is for you as well. I've discovered that when you observe masters in any field, you will find that they often do things that are very counterintuitive. And counterintuitive basically means doing the thing that seems like the right thing to do isn't usually the thing that actually works. But
Right.
doing the thing that doesn't seem to work is often kind of a hidden road you need to take to succeed. And if you look at 80% of what naturals do, usually you can say, yeah, I kind of understand that because it's really intuitive. It just makes sense. You can kind of make sense of that because it's logical and the obvious thing to do. But it's the other 20% that's really counterintuitive. It's like one little shift, one maybe just one simple change, and sometimes that's all it takes. And those magical shifts are usually only present in those 20% of the counterintuitive things. And when you look at the things they do differently, it almost usually doesn't make sense. You probably wouldn't even see it as anything special, but that's also the reason why you would never really come up with doing things that way. As I started to practice that way, the way I perceived naturals practiced, like I really made like a blank slate. I really thought about what are like the common myths that aren't working. That was like I almost inverted things, and I tried to look at by the behavior of naturals if that inverted thing is actually true or false. As I tried a lot of things, and I really tried a lot of different things, how I was perceiving that naturals were practicing. I was, with time, able to establish some very basic set of rules and ways for myself and for my practice. I started to notice how my progress, and I mean literally like on a daily basis, became a lot faster. It wasn't like every month or so, the way it usually happened, which was also like kind of unpredictable. And anytime I was stopping with the progress, like something was off, I could go through the rules and realize that I didn't do one of them. When I have students, they still forget some of those rules, and we go through it with them, and then they realize that was the missing piece, and they put it back into their system of practice, and then again they continue with progress. But because it's really counterintuitive and not natural to us, they tend to easily forget. Everyone. At some point, even for me, it was like I had to remind myself and basically create a little checklist that I could go through. Okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, and integrate it into my system until it was natural to me.
Even just within one technique of one particular skill, there's so many things. There's always a checklist to go down to make sure you're practicing it optimally, but you're speaking more of the whole practice as a general. You got to sometimes just write it down and make sure you're going down the list to make sure you're being optimal with
Yes.
your session. One thing I was going to mention that you just said is, so you're saying that once you found all these optimal steps and strategies, you would actually feel or results from one day to the next.
You actually do
You
feel
would feel a
it.
little bit of growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also very counterintuitive because the right things, if you progress properly, from the outside, it would look basically like you are doing a lot of mistakes. But actually, you are improving because you are pushing yourself. And we will get into that. From the outside, it looks completely different. And it's also one of the reasons why people get stopped in behaving that way. Because how it looks, is not necessarily how it is. When I had something ready that was working already for jugglers, then it became kind of a thing between artists.
Okay.
So other people started trying it out and achieved results with it. From people who are doing handstand to acrobatics and all that. And because it was working in that field, it made obviously sense that it could go on, it could expand more, and it could go into the hands of tennis players, basketball
Sure.
players, so on, because it's really just about the universal principles of progress. The reason,
Of course.
the
Yeah.
the root reason why we are progressing.
When you finally got into a groove with your practice and making progress, how long were you dedicating to sessions when you found this optimal practice routine, as opposed to the 10, 12 hours that you
I
were
didn't need as
dedicating
much.
earlier?
I
Right.
didn't need as much. I needed not even a quarter of the practice time because I was
Okay.
knowing what I did. I mentioned Anthony Gatto. Allegedly, he only practiced 2 hours. 2 hours in becoming the greatest juggler of the world when everyone else is like practicing. Like it's
Right.
very common to practice. Like jugglers, they practice a lot. It's like all day, every day. Everyone says jugglers are crazy because they just practice too much. There's some truth to it. uh, Once you know what you are doing, you understand how much you can squeeze out of a session.
Right.
You don't stay there extra 6 hours to squeeze 3 more drops out. When you know these are just 3 more drops, that not only doesn't make you that much better, it might actually either burn you out or make you even worse because as you're getting sloppier, based on the hours that you are putting in, you are getting sloppier and you are starting to rehearse a sloppier version of everything. So more doesn't equal better.
Yeah, that definitely the same goes for guitar. Once you pass a certain amount of hours, especially if you're not practicing optimally, then you're just wasting your time essentially, or possibly even deteriorating your skills if you're not even doing it the right way. But yeah, why waste extra time if you don't need to.
You just know how much is necessary, and it really becomes a thing where it loses sense to practice more, and it will make more sense once we go over one of the techniques.
Just to give a little context to the listeners, I mean, Lido, between his book The Art of Practice, and also he has a course called the Practice Blueprint, an online course community as well. I mean, it's a full system, just so you know, it's a full system, but there's a lot more to it. But just to share a couple key points, which
Yeah,
I
of
thought
course.
were interesting as well, just to apply it specifically to musicians.
Especially to guitar.
The first point I would love to mention is how you speak about making sure that you're always pushing the limits and going beyond your range, so
Yes.
that a lot of musicians typically want to just practice the art of practicing slowly and nice and clean, and in the safe zone to clean things up. But we also have to look at the other end.
Yes, and it has its place. It needs to be a fine balance. Yeah, I'm kind of, it's my thing to speak about pushing limits, but that doesn't mean that I don't keep it in a balance, because sometimes you really need to come back. But that's how, if maybe you remember, because you went through the course, there is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back technique. And that's kind of about exactly having that balance of pushing, coming back, refining. But there is a reason why. Just so everyone is aware, I'm really trying to cut down about like 30 pages into something as compact as possible. At least that you can get the basic idea. The first thing I realized early on is that when people start out practicing a skill, usually at the very beginning, you would probably agree, in the process, they tend to progress quite rapidly. But after getting some initial progress and achieving some results, which at the beginning happens quite fast, once a certain level of progress has been achieved, progress starts to slow down gradually. And I always wondered why that is, and whether this is something that happens to everyone. The thing is, many people believe that it's the normal tendency of progress to slow down as you get better at a skill. Actually, that's not necessarily the case. People think that just because, like something gets harder, it's reason enough for progress to slow down. But in reality, the level of difficulty is very relative. For example, for someone who is used to lifting 40 pounds, lifting 45 will be easier than for someone who has never lifted trying to lift 30. So it's always very relative to someone's current skill level. If we think about the fundamental question, why does progress itself happens? What is the fundamental reason that causes us to progress? Then we will arrive at the answer that it's nothing else but our body and mind trying to adapt to the stress we are putting them through. Usually, the very first thing that people get wrong when aiming for progress is progress in practice is really not a process of rehearsal, but a process of adaptation. And through adaptation, that's basically how our muscles grow, by trying to adapt to the stress we put them through. And that's how our skills advance as well. However, the mistake that happens almost universally is that people stop doing what essentially worked for them at the very beginning when they first started practicing a skill. So, whenever we are just starting out learning a skill from zero, what happens is we are immediately pushing our limits to the max. And as our skill is pushed, our system, based on the reasonable stress, tries everything it can to adapt. And as a result of that, we progress. And this is why progress at the beginning stages tends to happen rapidly and predictably, because we push ourselves almost continually in the very beginning when we just start out learning a skill. If we think about why progress seems to slow down over time as we actually get better, usually when we first start practicing, let's say a trick or skill or a song in your case, what anyone can observe is that the first 90% of learning a move goes very rapidly. It's usually the last 10% of learning a skill that creates trouble for us in making it really consistent. Like, that's the main issue. And that last 10%, by my observation and experience, can often take up to 3 or 4 more times longer than learning the initial 90% did. Why does that happen? And the answer is actually really simple. So we said that progress only happens because our internal system tries to adapt to the stress we are putting it through. So when we first start practicing something, there's a lot of stress and it pushes us a lot. But as we get better and more comfortable with the skill, once we basically learn 90% of it, gradually as we become better, it doesn't push us as much anymore. And the mistake people often make is believing I better first master this level before I move on to something more advanced. But actually, if we want to continue like progressing, then it just makes sense. Once we arrive to the initial 90% of a skill, we should switch to something slightly more difficult than the thing we were trying to actually improve in. Switch to something that still pushes us further, continues to activate this adaptation.
I mean, I think basically what I understand is, for example, as a guitarist, when you're picking up the guitar for the first time, you're forcing yourself to go from zero skill on the guitar to forcing yourself to adapt to a whole new skill set, which is going from level 0 to whatever that first level is. And then, but on the other hand, when you already know some of the foundational stuff, just to push up to the next level isn't it that same amount of adaptation? So you're not pushing it as hard, and your brain isn't
It
pushed as
just
hard to learn. Yeah.
exactly. It just doesn't. There is no stress, so there is no adaptation. And if practice is not rehearsal, not about rehearsal, it's about adaptation. Because why are we practicing? We are practicing for progress. Some people practice to just keep up the progress that
Just
they
to
had.
maintain, right?
Yeah, but that's not really what practice is about, or at least not for me.
I think that's one of the reasons why I always can connect the dots with fitness, and just like you said, basically it's
Yeah,
the
some
same
people just
thing.
maintain.
The muscles only adapt to stress, like you just said. So you have to whether it's adding 1 pound extra or 2 pounds, there always has to be a little bit of extra stress to continue any type of growth.
Yes,
Obviously there's a limit to everything,
there
but
is.
to reach your full potential at least. Yeah.
I'm also in maintenance right now because I, well, for many reasons. Some are private. I like to reinvent myself every couple of years, and
Yeah.
I think I really did what I wanted to do as far as juggling goes, and you just have to create time for that. So I had my performance years. I still perform, but it's been time to, at some point to move on. I don't like to I never want to be like a 2D character who is always, just doing the same jumps and mastering the same moves.
Everybody has their phases, and it's hard to you have to balance off with what your goal is at the moment, and you're in the phase you're
Yes.
going through. For myself too, I mean, I could relate because all of last year, if people would know actually the truth about my practice sessions, they'd be surprised. But I was so focused on other projects that take up time, the business side of creating
A lot.
creating an e-course, creating a
Yes.
book that I released, and everything.
Yes.
My goal was just to maintain, and if I had a performance, I'd add a little bit extra practice. But I didn't have a strong practice schedule because of having to kind of go through another phase, and my goal was
Yes.
just to maintain at least. One of the reasons that it was perfect timing to bump into your content again and to have you on as a guest right now is because I want to get back to my practice routines and push my limits a little bit this year,
I
get
don't
back
want to
into
discourage
the
you.
swing. So so
I don't.
now is a good time to apply these principles again.
Yes, could be done. At the same time, of course, we, as creators, we know that it takes a lot of time. It's like a completely separate life needed to
Yeah.
give something. And I also started to think about performing. When you are a performer, you are kind of a living art, but you only live as long as the performance is going on. And as soon as it's done, the art is kind of not living anymore. Like, it's hard to explain what goes on about how I try to find meaning in performing, but
Mm-hmm.
when I compared it to helping others reach what they want to reach a lot faster, I feel I feel that there's a lot of deeper meaning in that. Like, especially if you did what you wanted to do for yourself, then it's just kind of, even as a egoistical thing, like wanting to feel good about yourself. The next level is really kind of sending the elevator down, and it's not as easy to do that
Mm-hmm.
either, because you might want to do that, but it's a lot of work to do that. Like, I'm sure I could have become much better as a juggler if I wouldn't have wanted to write a book or anything else, because my focus would just be on one thing. Like, you kind of sacrifice at one point your own progress in order to create progress for others.
Just for reference, since I never mentioned it, can you share what was the record that you hit? Because maybe
I
some
did.
people are listening to you and thinking that you're downplaying your skills, but or the level you made it to. But just for reference, can
I
you
did
share?
11, 11 rings without a holster. A holster is usually like a kind of a, how should you say, where you can put there's a whole thing in the juggling scene about holsters. Maybe not anymore, but when I was really active, I was really against holsters, because they, by my interpretation, they help to cheat your way to higher numbers. Like,
Mm,
if you have a holster that can hold 4 or 6 rings, then you don't really need to master your 10 fingers of throwing up
mm,
all of them,
yeah,
because you can just cheat your way. There is a holster, and the hardest part is actually, like, releasing the rings,
launching
um,
them. Yeah.
launching them. And especially
Okay.
if you do it when you have 10 in the hand. So that was a whole kind of thing, and only like a couple of people did it without holsters, and that's the one of the things I'm proud of, doing 11 rings without holsters.
Yeah. Going to start to wrap it up a little bit, but there was another point that I wanted to mention that I think can be applied to musicians as well, and especially to myself, that I used to have problems with performance anxiety before. You talked about how as a juggler, your mind has to be there completely in the moment, and you can't let it veer off to any other thoughts while you're
Yes,
juggling, or else if you lose that train of thought, you're gonna fall off the
yes,
momentum. And same thing in performances. Once in the past, when I used to let my mind wander for a little bit, it just would start going off, and before I know it, the hands would be working by themselves. And when I would get back into it, that's when train wrecks would happen. You had an exercise or something that you've done for yourself to keep
yeah,
your mind
absolutely,
on this?
absolutely. I call it focus training, because that's what I used it for. It comes basically from the very basic Vipassana meditation, but the way they do it is kind of different than how I do it. And the other thing I wanted to mention, for a good performance, the reason why you have to have your focus under control, because it's not just being there. Like, when you are there, you are present. That's one thing. When you are present, you have like instant connection with all your 5 senses. But the thing is, every time I thought about not making a mistake, I did a mistake every time. It just, the mind just, as soon as you imagine having a mistake, it tends to happen. So that you really need to focus so much on the positive side that failure never even comes up, because it's very easy that it comes up. The way I do it is, as I said, it's coming from Vipassana, which is basically breathing, concentrating and focusing on your breathing. Breathing, as we all know, if you just focus on that, is a very boring thing. And that's very important because exactly because it's boring, you have to focus, you have to keep your focus on it by will.
Basic foundational of meditational style, just focusing on the
Yeah,
breath.
it's very on the breath, and it's very easy to get distracted, but you tend to get better, and there is a way to measure it, which usually in Vipassana doesn't happen, but I found out through experience that it does work. What I used to have is like a beads necklace or anything where you can clearly see where it beginning and where it ends. So you have like little balls on a rope.
Mm-hmm.
And you set up a timer, at first maybe just for 5 minutes. You start the breathing exercise, like just breathe in. I don't do the counting, like 4 in, because I see it as a clutch. I see it as a help. We don't want help. We want to make it as boring as possible. And just basically breathe in, breathe out. That's all you need to think about. And at a deeper level, you don't even think about that. You just do the breathe in and breathe out and nothing else. And as soon as you get distracted, of course, when you get distracted, you don't recognize that you get distracted. But as soon as you realize you got distracted, you just need to push one ball over so it gets registered. At the end, because there is maybe a knot at the end of the rope from where you began, you can count how many mistakes you made. Mistakes. They are not really mistakes. It's just unpreventable, especially at the beginning, that you get distracted. Anyway.
Anytime your mind wanders.
Yeah. Yes, every time your mind wanders. Anyway, once the timer is over and the 5 minutes are over, you count them and you just jot it down somewhere. And if you do that every day, maybe twice a day, ideally, but every day once is also fine, you will realize how the mistakes get less and less and less. And if you really expand on it, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you will realize that you can kind of feel when it sounds very woo-woo, but I just say what it is. You kind of realize when thoughts are kind of wanting to enter to your mind, but you already recognize it and you immediately get back into focus. So instead of realizing after it, you already realize it before it happens, before the distraction would happen, and you are back.
You practiced this as a separate skill set outside of juggling?
Completely separate.
Yeah.
But one of the
and
main...
and it helped with that.
It helped tremendously.
You were able to apply it easily. Yeah.
For my performance, it was one of the main pillars. Why
and you were
I
doing
was
this
safe.
daily. Yeah.
I was doing it daily, especially when I had daily shows. So it's also one of the things that you do to get into the groove of performing. Like, not before you do the warm-up, because of course, once you warm up, you have to stay warmed up. But something that you do before you even enter to go to warm up. Yeah, it really helped me a lot, and I think it's one of the main reasons why I'm regarded as one of the safer jugglers who doesn't drop as much. But there are so many strategies involving that. That's like a whole separate section that I never really created any training on. It just came up in one of the podcasts, and I tend to get asked about things like this.
No, I found it really interesting because that's something that a lot of musicians
yes,
have
when it
trouble
comes to
with,
performing, there are a lot of secrets that people don't know. Anyway, there was a great example about the thing that we talked about, and that's Sean Lane. You maybe have heard about him as a guitar player. I don't know. Did you?
I heard you mentioning him in another podcast, but I haven't heard of him. I haven't discovered him.
It's interesting how how most of the guitar, not most, I don't know, I'm not in the guitar field, but a lot of people
Right.
don't really know about Sean Lane. And the way I heard about him was at a point when I was interested, in learning to play guitar until
Okay.
I realized that I didn't have the capacity to learn yet another skill on top of all the ones I already needed to learn.
Y- Right.
Uh, but basically, I knew nothing about how to play guitar, and I still don't. However, when doing research, what I often like to do is find the very best who ever existed in the field when it comes to technique. So when I was searching around, and this was ages ago, when I was searching around about who the best guitar player on a technical level is, this guy's name kept popping up in very old
Okay.
forums, and he was called Sean Lane. He, as far as I know, probably didn't became as famous as he should have been, but the things I've read about this guy are that if you try to play guitar and you watch him play, it's literally impossible how fast he can play. And if you search around on YouTube for him, he was really, really good. It's like not just a little bit more impossible than anybody else who plays guitar. It's like everybody who plays at a level so complex that it's like technically impossible, and like there's Sean Lane, and
I'm
between
gonna
them
look
is
him
like
up. Okay.
a giant gap. So definitely check
Okay.
him out. Depending on your taste, he might not have written the most popular music, I guess, but he was, as far as my amateur eyes see, technically perfect in playing it. And in one of his interviews, someone asked him, how do you build up the speed? How do you learn to play that insanely fast? And he answered, I do something that is not the way most people teach to do it. He said, what I do, I play the scale and the guitar lick faster than I can play it. And I try to play it faster than I can play it, and I screw up as I try to do it that way. But I keep playing it faster than I can play it, and I try to adapt myself to the speed. And with time, I learned to play it that much faster. He also continued that once I move a slight degree back from my limits, coming back from that point, the speed doesn't even seem as hard anymore. So rather than how anybody else who teaches it, which is to do it slow, and I already heard this a lot, that a lot of people recommend to do it slow and build up the difficulty step by step and go only a little bit faster and a little bit faster, mastering that level before ever moving on. The important
Right.
thing is learning the basics right. And as soon as you have the basics kind of done, train at your limits. And now every genre has, like a limit, like a basic. Like every skill has basics that you have to learn and really
A
ingrain
basic foundation.
a
Yeah.
foundational, proper stance, proper finger movement, whatever it is.
Right.
We have
Right.
that in juggling. My guess is everybody has that in their skill. But once you
Right.
have that,
Basically, you're just saying once you have the proper form, proper foundation, then
exactly, then you have to train on your limits and try to adapt yourself to the stress rather than taking it slowly, one step at a time. It doesn't mean you have to overdo it, not to the point of, like ripping your arm off, but doing slightly more than your current limits allow and regularly pushing yourself out of your comfort zone by plan. So it's literally the exact opposite of how everybody else approaches it. My basic message is what you have achieved so far has very little to do with what you could achieve in the future. And there's really much less correlation than people believe. I really seen a lot of students go from stagnation to rapid progress, and often sometimes in a single day. There's really nothing unique about it. It's just the right strategy. It's not natural gifts, not natural talents. I never had any significant signs of talent or improvement when I started practicing. Practice doesn't make you perfect, only perfect practice does. And basically, that's what this is all about. So, how should I go about this? David and I have been talking about putting together a live online workshop on Zoom. One that basically takes my practice blueprint masterclass training to, I would hope, a completely new level. And because here's like basically the thing. Everything I know about practice, how to structure it, how to make progress faster, how to break through plateaus, it does work universally, but I've always run into one big challenge with my workshops. When it comes to specific technical questions, I obviously hit a wall every time. Since I'm not a guitar player, I don't practice every skill that exists. So when people ask about the technical side of playing guitar, I really can't give this kind of detailed feedback that they would really need, since I'm not a master of guitar. And that's
Sure.
exactly why teaming up with David made for me so much sense. David, I regard you as a master in your craft. You spent years refining your craft, and probably reaching levels that not everyone does. So you would make the perfect translator for my practice principles into what I would even describe as the language of guitar, because I've always seen different skills as almost different languages, and the principles I teach about practice work universally. But if you don't have deep enough knowledge, by my experience, within your specific skill, you also might misunderstand them. That's why having someone like David as a translator is probably so powerful. If he understands my concepts at a deeper level, but he also speaks proficiently your language, which is the language of guitar, he's able to break things down in a way that makes probably perfect sense for a guitarist, especially when it comes to probably answering specific technical questions. So this means that not only you would be learning the most effective practice methods, but you will also get real world feedback on your technical questions, something that I wouldn't be able to give on my own. So this would open up a very unique opportunity, not just to learn, but to be part of an experiment in changing how a skill is fought. Um, we were thinking about holding a 2 or 3 day live workshop on Zoom or some other platform with, I guess, limited attendance so we can actually give personal feedback. And right now, we just want to gauge your interest making something like this happen and see if this is something you would want to be part of. And if that sounds interesting, you can head over to thebookofpractice.com/guitar and just sign up with your email, and we will let you know as soon as it's ready to go.
No, I was just going to say, like I mentioned earlier, to everyone, one of the things I'm most adamant about is learning outside of the industry. And as you've heard Lido speak during the last this session, there's so many things that we could learn from him, and we just barely touched a little bit of at the pinpoints of some of his principles. But to be honest with you, there's so much more to it, and we were just talking more about Lido's journey and how he got to where he was. But in terms of the actual principles that you can apply, that would be that's for a whole nother session. And that's why we were talking about putting together a workshop for guitarists and specifically, or maybe some of my other musician counterparts as well.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And if there's enough interest, I am sure we will make it happen. I just created that link to gauge interest. Again, thebookofpractice.com is where you can find the book, but thebookofpractice.com/guitar is where I want to gauge interest in terms of for the workshop. If that's something you would like, then I'm sure we will make it happen. And David, thanks again for having me. It's been great talking and a long time coming. I appreciate very much your perseverance, and hopefully we will see each other again inside the workshop setting.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lido. I really appreciate your time, and again, sometimes I think not everything's by coincidence. I ran into you online.
Absolutely.
And really appreciated your work. So it's great that we finally were able to connect and
Thank you
share
very
some of
much.
this with my community. So we'll be in touch. And thank you to everyone who listened. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or you're curious about the workshop. And I'll see you in the next episode.